Welcome to WorshipTeamTraining.com. This is the Worship Team Training Podcast with your host and training director, Branon Dempsey. Worship Team Training provides live workshops and online resources to help inspire, create, and transform the leading of worship. Now, here's your host, Branon Dempsey.
Hey, worship teams, thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you here on our very first Worship Team Training Hangout video podcast. So this is live, and you're catching us through YouTube on our Worship Team Training link. So without further ado, we want to introduce our awesome favorite co-host, Stefanie Kelly. How are you today?
Woo! Doing great. How are you?
Doing great. Great to see you again. It's been a while since we had our last chat.
I know. It's great to see you too.
Yes, thank you. And the fabulous Tony Guerrero. How are you, Tony?
I'm good. I've decided to go full-on Timmons mode here.
Why not? It's Timmons Day.
There we go.
That is so dumb.
And speaking of dumbness...
That's what we've been trying to get across to you, Tim.
Oh, I get it. I see it. Dang it. Oh, give me the razor.
Timmons, everyone. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Tim, don't move your head too much because then the halo leaves.
Oh, right. Oh,
We need the halo on top of the head.
I don't see what you're talking about. Is there a halo? Oh, there is a halo. Whoa, man. This stuff keeps happening. I just keep being
Pretty
me,
amazing.
you know?
I mean, when you go all Timmons, you know, it's just all about the Timmons.
Well, I don't want to.
You want me to go get my Helen Keller Coke bottle glasses? Because I have some.
Hey, way to be sensitive, Steph.
Well, my last name's Kelly, so I figured I could kind of get away with it.
Yes, absolutely. Cool, guys. Well, hey, glad you're with us. And worship teams, we're glad to have you today. So again, this is our very first live video podcast. And many of you listeners, diehard listeners, have followed us ever since the beginning that we've done our audio podcast, which probably goes back 5-6 years ago. And along the way, we've added Tony, we've added Timmons, and now we're in this new era of video. And we just thought that this is just a better way that you can see the interaction, see the bannering. It's just a lot better than audio. So everybody feeling good today? Tony, Timmons, and Steph?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, pretty good.
Good. Well, today we're going to be talking about ageism, paid versus unpaid band and singers on your worship team, and then music worship styles. So let's begin with ageism, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
And with that on the rise, guys, you know, some congregation members feel that there's a particular or selected band that's leading worship. Some people in the church maybe find it difficult to connect. But at the same time, I don't know about you, but there's also seems to be this trend of aging volunteers and leaders that are asked to step aside. And some have even been marginalized and lost their positions. What's your response? Tony, go.
Good. Well, I've been opinionated about this issue for a long time, and I grow more and more opinionated as I get older and older. But you know, the truth is, I think a lot of people are being deceived in the church by thinking that this has that it's really a relevant issue how old anybody is. Just the other day, somebody on Facebook posted. And Timmons, it might have been you, or maybe it was my friend Dominic. Somebody was doing a performance, and they invited this guy, Stan Endicott, on stage. And the performance was all, 20-year-olds.
Right.
And
Yeah, Ethan
they
did.
invited Stan up, and Stan's, how old is Stan? He's like 104?
80.
Yeah.
85.
Right. Still with long hair?
My first thought was that authenticity has always mattered more than age. And the fact is, those 20-year-olds look at that guy as a hero, and he gets up there and is every bit as relevant, if not more so, than these kids. So I think people get lost in the style issue. I mean, here's the other side of it for me, is that I think the church spent most of the 1990s and 2000s trying to sound like U2,
Right.
which is a band that was started in the late 70s. When you look at Bono, tell me a single pastor who wouldn't die to have Bono as their worship leader, and how old is he? It has nothing to do with age. That's my
That's a good call.
my spouting off right there. It really has nothing to do with age, and I think it's a shame whenever pastors or church leaders fall into that trap of thinking that has any real relevance. It just doesn't. To me. Anyways. And I'm old.
Timmons.
Well, I agree with Tony. He is super old. Cute.
So it took me a while.
Yeah, that was a little latency. Man, I totally agree with Tony. I just, it's the hard part is that I'm going to agree in this because we've made this thing into this commercial entity. I mean, that's everything. Everything that we do in those 80 minutes that we gather every week is kind of into those, like, it's what we're showing people. And it's that line that I remember Stan actually said a long time ago. Somebody else quoted it, but whatever you win people to is whatever you win people with is what you win them to. And I think that line is genius, number one, and I think it's so telling with this stuff because I think we're ultimately trying to win people with this sound and this young, cool, hip thing, but that's also what we're winning them to, potentially. So, I mean, I think we could all agree that there's maturity, and it has really nothing to do with how awesome we sound, really. It's more of just a heart posture, which is what we know. But how do we... how do you help that happen in the church? I don't know. I think that's a bigger question, because I think we can all agree on this stuff, but... Yeah. Does that make sense?
What'd you say?
I said, does that make sense?
No, before that, everything.
Honestly, I felt for a long time that, I once saw Brennan Manning speak to a bunch of college kids, and those college kids they looked enraptured. They were so getting what he was saying, and that was the first time I was really in a situation where I could see a huge age discrepancy and realize that there was absolutely no age issue there at all. It was all about the authenticity of the message. And I feel the same way about, like, Morris Chapman's one of my favorite worship leaders in the world. He's in his mid-70s, and I see him lead worship in front of people of all ages, and there's simply no issue about how old he is or even the style of music that he does. There's just no issue. And I think I love that quote you just said, Tim. I'm going to write that down somewhere. But you're right. I mean, we win them with the big show, and then they want to see the big show.
Right.
And then they keep tithing to the big show, and then pastors go, man, we got to keep people in these seats. We got to get people in these seats, so we got to have this thing.
Right.
When that's just, it's ultimately in the economy of God, that has nothing to do with anything, but it's kind of just where we are. So I think my question is if we all agree on this. But it's kind of like when we all go to a worship conference and you learn all these things, and then you go back and you go, we're going to try this, and then everybody's like, no, we're not.
Yeah.
So it's how do you convince the people that need to be convinced that the people that they're convincing in the 80 minutes don't want this or do want this? I mean, it's kind of been a cycle that's, I think, pretty deep.
Stefanie.
But see, it loses its depth when we're making fun of it right now.
I can't hear Stefanie at all. Is she talking?
No, Stefanie.
Hello.
Stefanie, you have a really good you got a really good understanding for the congregation and church. What's your take on it?
Well, what I was really thinking the whole time is I just got my driver's license, so it really doesn't.
Serious?
To me. Well, it's taken me a while, but no, I
thought she was serious. I was feeling terrible for laughing.
Well, well, she just turned 16, right?
Yeah.
Ish. But this is Sam, by the way, and she feels very passionately about this. In fact, she'll probably start hissing here pretty soon.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I'm really allergic to cats. I'm glad this video.
No, I was going to say, kind of jumping into where you were starting to go, Tim, I think we have to influence our senior pastors. I think that is one of our next missions that has to be on the top of our list, because we really do have to support them. And if their vision is, shall I say, tainted, for lack of a better word, with, the idolatry and imagery that I think has, permeated our modern church culture, then I think many of them are on the wrong track. And so I think any opportunity that we have to just lovingly influence and say, hey, this isn't godly.
Right.
And, I can't imagine having grown up my whole life in the church without godly, older and younger people mentoring me and holding my hands up.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't still be doing this today, and though my roles are changing, and yeah, you have to embrace that as you do get older, but there should be no reason why we all can't worship together and see eye to eye and compromise. And I think it starts with the senior pastor. I think he sets the tone and the vision, and we just have to influence that in a godly way. And I think that can happen. I don't think that's a pipe dream.
It's almost like we talk about, hymns and modern choruses.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's there's so much value in all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's just an interesting way to look at it, and as we go toward encouraging leadership, and that's also on young leaders to have the respect for the elders, and the elders to have the respect. I mean, it's really this mutual thing that can happen, just like the example that Tony was giving. So Ethan Hulse and his band brought Stan Endicott, who's 805 years old, up on stage, but there's such a mutual respect, and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's something to learn there.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, that's a lot said, and folks, you're probably right now just tweeting and asking questions, so we will take a few, so absolutely use the comment box at the bottom of this video and type in your questions. Guys, let's go ahead and move on to our next question because we only have so much time. Paid versus unpaid, band and singers. Tony, you and I went round and round on this a long time ago, and it's still relevant today. So, based on that, is it fair? Is it right? What's your take on it?
Fair. Is it fair? Yeah, it's fair. It's also fair to. I've always had this thought that it doesn't matter to me which route your church decides to go. You can have an all-volunteer team or an all-paid team. It doesn't. I don't have a preference in terms of how it's supposed to be done. But I also have no issue at all with musicians who expect to be paid for their services. When those services, when the church basically is requiring your services, there can be the expectation of being paid, and I think Scripture bears this out in a lot of different ways. There's the example in Nehemiah where they basically were being scolded because they hadn't been taking care of the musicians, and the musicians had to go off and farm their fields, and so they weren't there for the temple service, and they were basically being told, you go and get those musicians and you farm their fields so that they can come here and do this work. I mean, it's about providing for them for that service, because being a musician in the church, especially in some churches, that can be a 2-3 day job every week. Between rehearsals and planning and the actual services, I have no issue. I have no issue with musicians who expect to be paid for professional services. I will add this for any musicians whose ears are perking up and going, "Oh, great! I'm going to start demanding money." I did have one musician come to me when I was leading the program I was at and say, because we had a mix of paid and volunteer guys. And he said, I think I'd like to be paid from now on, and I consider myself a professional, musician. And I said, that's great, that's totally your call, but let me just show you where you end up on this list now, because when I'm paying somebody, I expect a certain level of professionalism in not only in their demeanor and how they handle their business, but in your performance abilities and your skill level. I pay people because of the excellent skill that I need in order to do the work we're supposed to do. And I basically just said, you know, in a very loving way, but let me show you now where you are on this roster, because if I'm paying people, I'm going to call this guy first, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, you know. And so there's a reality there too. If you're going to expect to be treated as a professional, you have professional responsibilities. And I could talk about this all day, so I'll just let
you hurt my feelings when you said it that tough, though. I mean, when we talked the other day, and it just hurt my feelings. It was like, Tony, let off, buddy. I know, I get it. You don't think I'm that good.
You know, Tim, here's the great thing.
I tried to be as funny as I could.
If you're on the C team right now, you know, you just keep working and practicing, and you might get up to C+.
Oh, Steph. Thank you.
That was good, Stefanie. Very good. So, Steph, how do you feel about it, Steph?
I think it's something that you should really pray about, be discreet about. You do not have to publicize to your teams who's getting what. And I think it's totally valid if you need to augment a team and you're missing a critical instrument, and, you know, not having them there causes you to not be able to lead the vision that is happening for your church musically. So I also think that, and I may be causing some controversy, but I think that non-believers have a place on the stage. And if we need to pay them to get them in there, why not? And if we have and have used our money well, why not? I'm not saying they should lead a song or sing or speak behind the mic if they don't know the Lord, but I think that's different.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just more of a side man and you're filling a needed position, I have seen personally with my own eyes people come to Christ and stay in Christ because of their exposure to church. You know, of course, we have to treat them well.
Right.
But
yeah, I mean,
it's in a book that I wrote. Oh, sorry, Tony. You wrote it. Okay, go.
Well, you know what's funny is I wrote that book, and because I deal with that issue, it seemed like most people, that's all they read in that book was the issue about bringing non-believers onto the platform.
Yeah.
It was that or getting paid, and yet there's so much more in that book. I mean, it's a brilliant book.
What's it called again? I'm serious.
It's called Attracting Quality Musicians.
Okay.
And I do talk about that. Stefanie, I'm completely with you. I was brought to the Lord because musicians needed me. A church needed me as a musician, and I was the option that they were presented with, and they paid me to come, and I kept coming for, I was there a few years before it really took hold for me. But man, they loved me in those years, And I have made that my own mission as well. I always say this: if you're a plumber, your mission field is the plumbing community. If you're an electrician, the electricians are that's your mission field. And we always look at missions as I've got to go to Africa, I've got to go to Asia, but you've got your mission field, and God places you in communities, and that's your mission field. And so your work community is also your mission field. And for me as a musician, the musical community in my town is my mission field. And I would say this: I can guarantee that there's somebody listening right now who is leading a church program and saying, why aren't musicians just coming in my door to play? I don't have bass players, I don't have a drummer, I don't have all this stuff. Why aren't they coming in my door? And let me ask you this: how many musicians in your community even know you exist? Like, what are you doing as a musical leader in the community and in your church to go out and let them know that you're here? And you have a responsibility. You have a mission field. There are probably 100 musicians within a mile of your church that have no idea who you are. And that is 100% on you. So if you're waiting for God to save them and have them come clamoring into your church just to play on your program, I think you're missing out. God will do His work, but you've got a job to do as well. So I've always been a big fan of that, and Stefanie, like you, I can name a bunch of examples where we invested in a musician in a very safe way, because there are times where it's not appropriate, and
Right.
there are, and frankly, I don't do this with singers because they have to sing the words, and
Yeah.
that's a different
That's
issue.
where I draw the line too.
Yeah. But I can have a bass player chomping eighth notes behind somebody, and he doesn't know necessarily what's going on, but it facilitates what is being done. But I've had so many musicians come to the Lord, and in real, genuine ways. One of my favorite stories is a guy who I knew him from the club scene. He was as atheist as they come, and he's now a full-time worship leader. And that the story of his transition and coming through that it's just it almost brings me to tears every time. It's just amazing, and I know several stories like that. So God absolutely can work in that way, but you do have to be very safe and very cautious about it. So,
Got a question just to play the counterpart of this. What do you say to those in the church who may have a problem with this, and they know that there are a few members in the worship team that are not believers and they're leading them in worship?
I think we have to show them grace and say, because we actually had a conversation, my pastor and I, recently about this issue. This person isn't being paid, but he is growing in his faith, and he's got some issues he's working through. And we had one conversation, and we said with him, hey, this is what the Bible says. Can you commit to this? And he was like, I'm going to try. And from that point on, if anybody comes up to us, we feel like we have peace to be able to say, you know what, we're dealing with that. God's dealing with that. We've addressed it. He's working on it. Let him be. Don't cast the first stone here. Just pray for him that he walks with the Lord. And it seems to be working.
Yeah.
I was at for a while, I was both at a large church and also part of a small church team, and I won't explain how that all worked, but I was able to do both at the same time for a while. And I learned on this issue that the small church has a great luxury that the large church didn't. Well, the large church, you can do this whole kind of thing more anonymously. I mean, people don't necessarily know everybody on the platform, but in a small church, you have the luxury of going up to your congregation and the pastor speaking in your service or something and saying, look, next Sunday our drummer is going to be on vacation. We've decided to hire this guy and bring him in. He doesn't go to church. He's not a believer, but we've invited him to come play, and so we want you to know that he'll be here. We want you to be praying for him this week. We want you to love on him next week, and it's a great luxury to be able to get your entire congregation around this, and then nobody's deceived into thinking he's on the platform, he must be a leader.
Right.
I always look at it too as it's kind of an issue of geography, because if we're doing our job right, there's a lot of non-believers in our churches, right? If that's
Right.
that's kind of the goal, is they're supposed to be in there, and if we're all singing a song, and even those non-believers are standing up and reading the words and singing, are they really causing you to not worship because the non-believer standing next to you is singing the song? So it's kind of an issue of geography for me. If I put that bass player on the platform, suddenly it's all out of whack, and this isn't a real worship service, and whatever it is. So, as much as you can remove the stigma and get your congregation behind the process and have them be a part of it, I think that's kind of key also.
I want to jump in real quick because you said something interesting. The non-believer standing next to me singing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scripture does say, Jesus said that no one can come to the Father unless the Spirit draws him. So can't we then agree that if a non-believer is singing a worship song or a non-believer is in the band playing, isn't it not that the Father's already drawing him?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that is beautiful.
Tony started it.
I started what?
Timmons, what do you think?
You know.
You started a good thing, Tony, and that's why you're here. Timmons, what's your thought?
Tim, can you back a little away from the camera? Just a little. Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you. Ooh,
I
thank
almost
you.
had to pin on my mustache again.
Which part do you want me to jump in on?
Just go. Okay, so back to you, Tony.
I'll weigh in later.
Sorry.
Harmonica, please.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we really could talk about this forever, and there are valid points on every side of this issue, and it's a very cautious issue. I don't tread into it lightly because the same thing we're talking about can be done horribly wrong, and I've seen people burn that way also. So
how does one go about it the right way?
Well, definitely in prayer, in consulting with leadership. It shouldn't be done randomly. Your team needs to know what's going on. I mean, there's so much that needs to happen there. You need to be watching for if a non-believer comes in and is disrupting to a service, then that needs to be dealt with. And there's a lot of frankly, if believers are disrupting to your service, that's an issue, a bigger issue for me. And frankly, oh gosh, I wish I could just call out verse numbers, but I can't. But there is the one verse where God says, I hate your noisy festivals and your music and all this, and he's talking to believers who aren't acting as believers. And I think there's probably a lot more of that in the church and on our worship teams than there are non-believers disrupting a worship service.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's important to specifically spell, say that 3 times backwards.
Yeah.
Out to the particular musician that may not know the Lord, what the guidelines are. Like, for example, and this is a true story, we had a guy that we were ministering to that was an awesome guitar player, and he came to church and everything and was playing with us and wasn't singing. But in our breaks, he was hanging out by the high school in the junior high room, and he was a big guy, just smoking away, just taking a cig break. And not that smoking is wrong, it was just in that setting, right next to the high schoolers, that he was taking a smoke break. And it's like I learned, okay, be specific and just say, hey, you may not share all of the same faith issues. We're all a work in progress, but these are some guidelines that we do have. And most of the time, after that point, people take that seriously, and they don't do that kind of, what's the word? Non-foolery.
Yeah.
I had to look up that verse because I hate not knowing it. Amos 5:21. God says, I despise your religious festivals. Hate and despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I have no regard for them. Away, this one kills me. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. He's talking to us, the believers. He's not talking to the non-believers. So,
right.
I guess the answer is if somebody comes up and has a problem with it, you tell them, away with the noise of your...
That's good. The time we have left, let's move on to our last question. Every church now is doing contemporary music or blended service in some sort of fashion, and we're all making everyone mad equally in the church. So the question is this, I mean, have you seen contemporary now embracing the traditional? And of course, we've seen some traditional churches now trying to embrace contemporary, and they've tried to make strides into appealing their congregations. Is it working? Are we? I mean, we talked a little bit about this before, the opening the video. Are we moving too fast to be too contemporary, or are we now becoming irrelevant for the sake of trying to be relevant? Go.
I see more compromise from the older generation trying to be able to worship with the contemporary music that they may not care for far more than I see the compromising from the younger generation.
Wow.
In adding traditional hymns. However, that being said, I do some work about once a month down in San Diego at College Avenue Baptist, and to me, it is on the cutting edge of doing what I think is so godly and appropriate, because their vision is to, and they came from a divided church, they will not ever have a divided church again with music. And so we make it a point to do 1 or 2 hymns every Sunday, but we play them the way they were written. We don't veer off and do crazy arrangements. Excuse me. And sometimes we bookend them if it feels like it's not going to work as far as the flow. But then we're doing the modern stuff. We're doing oceans and elevation worship, but we're being really strategic, and we have a whole team that plans the music every week. It's not just me, which is really helpful. But I think more dialogue, more community input on this with all ages is the way to help it.
Yeah. Cool. Next step.
I would just say I think it is a role that I did not see excuse me, before. And I think it's our role as leaders is to lead our people, and it's not lead them in songs. I think our job is to lead them in a posture. So if that's my role, then what posture am I leading these people in? Am I just leading them in songs that I think we're wasting our time? And I think that's the majority of worship leading, is just leading songs. And I don't see that as our role. So I think as a worship leader, my job is to help people understand what they're doing and own their response. So if I'm doing a poor job, I think I'm not helping people own their response. I think I'm having them respond, but they're not owning it most of the time. I mean, I just watch it all over the country. That's what I see. And you don't have worship leaders that are actually leading people and helping people move, leading people through something instead of just singing songs to them. Most people are just doing that. So, yeah, I guess my thought would be, how do we as leaders help our people by teaching them well and helping them, figuring out how do we help them respond well instead of just, you're going to do this song, we're going to do this amount of hymns, we'll do this amount, which is wonderful, it's just more of the practical side. But what's that doing? What are you actually teaching by doing that? And maybe you're teaching more by doing it and not saying anything about it. That probably made no sense.
No.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a nonverbal teaching that is just blending them, and then there's the verbal teaching of, okay, what are we doing? Whether it's a polka song, or whether it's an old school hymn, or whether it's a new school song, what are we actually doing? Most of us aren't even thinking that way, and when you're so steeped into what you're doing every single weekend, it just gets, you lose sight. We just lose vision of what we're actually doing. That's my thought.
Tony?
I think it kind of it's the same issue for me as the age issue, that I don't think the style of music is all that relevant for me. I mean, I know I'm different than a lot of the quote-unquote audience because I'm a musician and I like different styles of music for different reasons, but I mean, if that were to hold true, that 20-year-olds need to have music that sounds like what's on the radio for 20-year-olds, well, I'm a jazz musician by trade. I'd be bored to death if I was in a worship service that was all jazz. Like, I just don't think it's true. I think there's very few people who are that limited in their scope of musical tastes, and that ultimately you can transcend their musical taste with content and authenticity, and I just don't think it matters as much as most leaders and tend to think it does. I just don't, and I realize I'm not necessarily in the mainstream with that kind of thinking, but it's to be honest, I'm kind of tired of the conversation. I don't mean this conversation,
right.
But I mean,
Whoa.
I remember talking to one pastor friend of mine years ago, and he was considerably older than me, and he said, Tony, we've been having this same conversation in the church since I was a kid in the early 60s. How do we reach the young kids? How do we, all the same conversations about age, about style of music, about all these things. And so as much as we're going to continue to have this conversation, the conversation's going to continue 30 years from now and 60 years from now. And I think part of the reason why the conversation will never end is because we allow that type of myopic thinking to overtake us, and maybe it's fear or something, or ignorance. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think age has an issue, is a real issue in the church. I don't think the style of music should have that much of an issue. I think there are absolutely times when style is relevant to what you're doing. I play in a gospel service, and it's, we're telling people this is a gospel music service, so it's not like we're just going to throw in a country tune or a heavy metal tune. I mean, but that's not the issue. The issue is those same people sitting in there, if presented with different styles of music for the right reason, the style of music fades away. It doesn't really matter. And if the authenticity is there, I just think I just don't think it's as important as we make it seem. And we've turned it in this huge dividing line in the church. Not just we, but it's been that way for a long time. And every single time the argument bubbles up again, it turns out we're all wrong, because when they first brought electric guitar into the church, there was huge uproar about that. When they first brought drums into the church, there was huge uproar. When they first started doing anything rock and roll, it was just this huge thing. And now people don't even, it's not even an issue that's part of the music of the church, and we were wrong to even argue about it. I don't know.
Well, and that's where I think we've got to influence
darn church,
those above us who make those decisions, and influence our pastors and shepherds to talk and to preach about this, and to preach about unity, and how this is so insignificant.
Yeah.
And there are far too many people dying of cancer, and unbelievers. We live in a military town. The unbelievers, they come into this and they smell it and they run. And, those are issues. And our world here, I'm going to get on my soapbox. I love my soapbox. But, the Lord is coming back one of these days. And we need to be unified as a church. And so I think we have to have the conversations with the ones making those decisions and keep pushing forward. And if we get fired, so be it. But I think godliness with contentment is great gain. That's what the word says. And I think this is godly. That's
good. I would add this too. If we were to look at what I'm going to generalize, what I assume every pastor visualizes their congregation doing or being or how responding during a worship service, and they have a picture of hands in the air and singing along and all that, and that's what I want my congregation to look at. So I think it needs to be this type of music, because that's what I see brings that out, in my congregation. Right away, you can shoot that whole thing down by just taking them to a small little grass hut village in Africa where they're having a worship service, and the music sounds nothing like what we're doing, and guess what? There is far more joy and worship being expressed. I'm not saying going on, but being expressed in a much more visible, tangible way in those settings. And what's the music they're doing? It's way different than the music we're doing. And so if that's the case, if that's the argument you're going to give me, then you need to get some tribal drummers up there and some chanters in your church, because that's the music that's really going to get that quote-unquote reaction. So if you're aiming for the reaction, you're looking at it the wrong way. The reaction has to come from the authenticity and the joy being expressed, And like I look at the worship leader as an angled mirror, meaning if this is here's the audience over here. I don't know if you can see. Here's the audience. Here's the worship leader. This is the worship leader to me, because the audience needs to be looking here, but instantly be reflected up.
That's right.
And the minute that they're here and their focus stops right here and focuses here, we've lost the whole purpose of that anyway. So the worship leader has to be really, truly, honestly responding to God in the moment to be validly, in my opinion, validly worshiping, and thus being a leader of worship. I was asked not too long ago who my favorite worship leader was, and I started going off on this long answer. Well, I really, in this style of music, I really like this guy, and in this style of music, frankly, I think Tim's one of the best worship leaders out there. I don't like being around him, so of course. But skill-wise, but I do feel that. I feel there's a lot of great worship leaders out there for a lot of different reasons, and I started going down my list, and I ended up finishing that conversation, coming up to him a few days later and saying, I want to revise my answer because I realized that none of that's really true. You asked me who my favorite worship leader was. My favorite worship leader was the pastor in my old church of 150 people who could not sing a note, did not play a single instrument, but he was always the first one out there ready to go during a worship service. He was always the loudest worshiper. For me, more than the guy up on stage singing, he led the worship of that church. He led me in worship. I was my model of worship is really him, and not as a pastor leader, but his model of standing up there worshiping with the abandon that he did. And he was way more animated than I'll ever be, but that's my favorite worship leader, is my old pastor. And he was not a singer, not the guy on the platform.
Awesome.
I have a question. Stefanie?
Yes?
Where are you going tonight?
So true. So true. You beat me to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
old sassy pants.
Yeah.
You know what?
Big night out?
No.
I love cats.
If that was coming through. No, it's one of the 3 wedding dresses I bought 8 years ago, because I didn't know that you're supposed to go get your wedding dress fitted. And so I just bought a whole bunch of dresses online, and none of them fit, and I returned them. So this one I'm hoping to maybe potentially give to a potential bride in our church.
Aww.
Yes.
That's nice.
Dude, Tony, you just got schooled. You just got like Jesus juked right there.
Trying to make a joke out of me.
Right.
That's funny.
Well, a lot of great dialogue here. Tim, you gonna say something else?
No, I'm just laughing. I got other funny things going in my head that I'm not gonna say.
Tim, do you have multiple songs going on in your head right now?
Nope. Ooh, nope.
Just this one.
That's super dope.
We've just lost all of our audience.
Right.
Guys, you are fabulous people. Thank you again for being on with us. And there's a lot of great things said here, and I think the bottom line of it is that we indeed have to, what was said here a lot was helping our congregations worship and teaching them to respond. And ultimately, yes, it's done by the senior pastor, not by the worship leader. A lot of agreement here. I think that we've used a lot of labels and phrases of blame that really brought us back to the same argument. Tony, you're very right about that. And I wrote this morning on the post on Worship Team Training Facebook, and it says, worship goes beyond the motions. And it has exactly to do with this. I said here, your spiritual life must be something that goes beyond your time spent on stage. Worship begins in your personal life, your relationship with God, long before you ever step in front of the congregation on a Sunday morning. It doesn't begin with the click track or by the clock. It begins in the garden. If there is a disconnect from your personal life on stage and your spiritual well-being, then you are living a life that is not fully satisfied in the grace of God. And you are living a life which you are not fully satisfied with all the Lord could have for you. It's much like walking through a garden and ignoring all the beauty in which God created. Worship is not dictated by the clock, so the question is a personal one. Are you a worshiper, really worshiping, or are you just going through the motions? So much to think about. Guys, thanks again for joining us. You're fabulous people. Love you guys. Stefanie, please join Stefanie at stefanikelly.com.
With an F. With an F like flower.
Yes. Okay, so Stefanie with an F like flower.com. stefanikelly.com. And then timtimmonsmusic.com. Right, Bubba?
Timmonsmusic.com.
With a T like tower.
And a W like wrong for me. But good. Timmonsmusic.com.
Sure.
And Tony, your site,
.com. As in comedy.
It's okay. Nobody knows how to spell Guerrero, so it's. I don't even need to make a joke.
Yeah, that's true.
That's good. And also, guys, be sure to check out these fabulous leaders that are now mentors with us on Worship Team Training. We're also going to be relaunching that program, the Mentoring Ministry program, which you can sign up, a one-on-one mentoring session for an hour a week with Stefanie, with Tony, with Tim, depending on where Tim is and what he can do. Probably not. We're not sure. But maybe
For
you don't.
Tim in just his life, right?
Yes. That's right. And we're also launching the brand new Worship Team Training site pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. And we will do our next podcast live video just like this coming soon. So if you have joined us late, or maybe you're watching this later on and you have questions, be sure to type us in to the comment box and ask so that we can respond back to you, and maybe we'll address it back on the next show. So Stefanie, Timmons, and Tony, thank you guys so much for joining us. Great to have you. Can't stand cats.
Oh, she's got her cat. I thought I should bring my cat out. I think
right?
There you go. So signing off, guys. Worship teams and leaders and pastors, have a fabulous day. Stefanie, Timmons, and Tony, thank you guys again. Have a good one.
Bye, y'all. See you next time.
Later.
Bye, guys.
This has been a Worship Team Training broadcast and digital production. We'll see you again right here on worshipteamtraining.com.